we tweaked the talent management process wherein they had to focus at the top of the house only on those positions which have a big impact on value. So that you're still focused on managing talent in those critical roles. Nothing is at risk, but you also help them save some time by saying this is where you need to focus on. So that's the meaning of talent to value, which is focusing talent management efforts on the highest value creating positions and asking tough questions. Do you have the right people in those jobs? Are they fully engaged? What are their development needs? Do they have mentors who can break walls if required for them to be able to do what they need to do to deliver that value agenda for the company?
Welcome to the HR Impact Show, where we have honest conversations with global people leaders about their journey in building great workplaces. I'm your host, Dorothy Yiu, CEO and co-founder of EngageRocket. EngageRocket is a HR technology and advisory company that leverages on data to help enhance employee experience from hire to retire. Joining us today is Jayaram Philkana, JP. JP is currently the CHRO of Indorama Corporation, and he has a wealth of experience that spanned across 3 decades in biotech, agriculture, as well as pharmaceuticals. I'm excited to have him on the show, and we'll dive deeper into his thoughts in building top talents as well as driving meaningful change. Welcome to the show, JP. It's great to have you here. For our audience who may not be familiar with you, could you maybe share more about yourselves, both at work and also outside of work?
First of all, thanks for having me here, Dorothy. I would say I'm an Indian in heart, pretty much a global citizen in many other ways. Had the privilege to live and work in different countries, including Indonesia, USA. This is my third stint in Singapore. I have a 20-year-old affair with Singapore, which still continues. My grandfather, very proud of it. My grandchild lives in Austin, Texas. And a very proud father of a NS man who's just completed his service and joined NTU.
Thank you for the national service. I have 2 sons myself.
Sure.
Very nice. How about at work professionally? Tell us more about that.
So I've been mostly in human resources for the last 30 years plus. I flirted with some opportunities outside HR, primarily in mergers, acquisitions, and subsequent integration. Also did some interesting work in corporate B2B kind of a role when I was based in the US. But I would say I'm a regular HR person in my heart, somebody whose passion is helping people realize their potential and deliver business results. At the end of the day, that's what I genuinely enjoy doing.
I think you're being really humble here because your experience in HR spans across 3 decades, actually a little bit more, I think 33 years, if I'm not wrong. And you have held very senior roles in large global organizations. Now, JP, I know you have point of view in terms of the strategic value that HR brings to the organization. Can you tell us more about that?
It's one view, one way of looking at it. And what I found really worked, learned from other successful professionals, and had an opportunity to do it wherever I had the opportunity to lead is I believe HR has a very important role in ensuring a few clarities, particularly 3 clarities on the what, which is the organization's goals. While it is typically the CEO and the board who get to decide on the vision and the mission and how to go about it, HR has a very important role in making sure every single employee, especially those in the front line, understand what is the big purpose. For example, in Syngenta, the big motivation for employees is that I'm part of a company which is here to do good for the farmer. Or in Indorama, the big purpose is we are in the business of producing essential materials. That serves to inform why am I working, what am I working towards. So let's say organization's goals. The second is clarity on roles of individuals and teams. Okay, how do I connect with the big picture? What is my contribution? What should I focus on in my job? And what should I help others as they focus on their jobs? And 3 is fairness and rewards and consequences. To me, that's a better way to describe culture because culture to me describes what is encouraged and what is discouraged in an organization's ways of doing things. I like to believe HR needs to be in the driver's seat in ensuring these 3 clarities across the organization and use the people processes for good effect in helping people connect with these clarities.
So I love the fact that you talk about clarity, right? Because I think clear expectation is just a really important aspect to mobilizing the entire workforce. But with all the changes that's happening globally, that people say change is the only constant. So external change is one, internal changes often happens too. How do you ensure that these three clarities are sustained over time?
Let me give an example. When I look at what we did in Syngenta, particularly in the year 2022 and 23, our employee listening processes told us, especially the frontline, they value digital capabilities and investments in digital infrastructure as something that will make their life easier and serve their customers better. And that's not something we were very good at as an organization. And so that became, therefore, the focus for our learning and development efforts during those 2 years, and wherein we engaged as many people as possible, including using the technology to bring everybody together to learn. And we invited leaders to teach because that's the best way to make a leader actually learn something. When you ask a leader to teach, he or she has to put in more effort. So I think that is one example where the power of listening helped us recalibrate where we should focus our learning and development dollars and management time.
Oh, I cannot agree more. I mean, even when you think about any type of change management processes, always ensuring there's that continuous loop of feedback will really help you adjust your way. I want to double click on your experience with Syngenta. You have a position that is very interesting. It's the Global HR Transformation Officer. This is a role that I don't often hear of. So tell us more about what that role entails.
One small correction, it's not the officer of the company, but I had an opportunity to lead HR transformation globally. I would highlight two things, Dorothy. One is in a regional context, I was expected to lead moving away from one HQ in Singapore, serving 12 countries in the region, to creating four regional offices, three of which are co located in operating countries, which brought in a very good dynamic of people in regional functions being closer to the operating businesses and customers in the field, as also reducing the cost to serve the markets. Because these were three relatively lower cost locations, being one in Turkey, second in Thailand, and third in India. The other project which I had a chance to contribute to and lead in some ways perhaps is called Talent to Value Project, wherein during the calendar year 2024, we're going through a very tough economic cycle. And leaders felt that they were very stretched to make sure that you bring as much agility and as much efficiency into your day to day operations. And we tweaked the talent management process wherein they had to focus at the top of the house only on those positions which have a big impact on value. So that we are still focused on managing talent in those critical roles. Nothing is at risk, but you also help them save some time by saying this is where you need to focus on. So that's the meaning of talent to value, which is focusing talent management efforts on the highest value creating positions and asking tough questions. Do you have the right people in those jobs? Are they fully engaged? What are their development needs? Do they have mentors who can break walls if required for them to be able to do what they need to do to deliver that value agenda for the company? I think these are two interesting things I had a chance to do in that role.
So, talent to value program, was it essentially identifying hypos within the organization and making sure that they are the ones that are truly thriving within your organization?
In a way, it is not very different in terms of the what, because talent management per se involves identifying those high potentials who have the will and that learning adaptability more than anything else, and the aspiration to do more. But the difference in the talent to value is there could be 100 people who are high potential, but maybe 30 of them are in positions which create maximum value for the company at this point of time. And you would rather want the management to be focused on those 30 and not on all 100 so that they can take their time away, which is saved, and focus it on something else. So the what is the same, but the who, on whom it is focused, we narrowed it down. We brought in a lot more focus.
Well, that's very interesting because it's going one step beyond just identifying hypos, but hypos in high value positions. Actually, just now you talked about learning agility being one of them. And I am a firm believer that that's really an essential skill set, not just now, but also in the future of work. So, how do you go about identifying not just high posts, because the value position is very much already known to the business, but how do you go about identifying the high posts and how do you continue to nurture them?
To make it an interesting short soundbite, I would say most important is understanding whether the person has that aspiration to do something different. And when the person says no, peel one more layer and say why. Understand what could be holding this person back. I think that's probably the most valuable exercise because you don't want somebody who wants to do a bigger job because he or she wants to have more control or run a bigger budget or whatever, but rather somebody who thinks being in a different role would allow me to serve a larger part of the organization or bigger customers or bring some kind of a differentiation in the way we do whatever we do, including within the organization. So the motive is very, very important to understand. Is it for the person's own benefit that the person wants to do more? Or is the person actually wanting to do something more for others? And moving into a bigger role or a different role is a byproduct. I found that it's very important to promote people into leadership roles when they want to not just lead, but they want to do something good, either for the teams or for the customers, or preferably for. Now, this is very different from a textbook definition of potential and whom you want to invest on, but these are some learnings over a period of time. The textbook definition would be yes, results agility, people agility, cultural agility. I mean, somebody's ability to do something very different in a very different kind of a context.
Would you say that is similar to value alignment to what the company stands for? And how do you measure that, the aspiration? Is it through tactically speaking? Is it through interviews? What are your thoughts?
Sometimes you need leaders who will want to steer the company in a very different direction, not just be aligned with what and how the company prioritizes today, but maybe for the survival of the company and for the company to do well, you need these leaders to take us in a different direction. So you take me back to roughly 2005 or so, which was actually the first time I came to Singapore in a regional role. We were an organization at that time which had a commodity trading mindset. You didn't even refer to customers as customers, you call them as counterparties. And increasingly, the world of commodity trading was going in the direction of commodity traders providing solutions to customers and not just a good price and reliable, timely availability of material. Meeting other needs of the customers better than somebody else who can also deliver the same thing because remember, it's a commodity. Right? There's not much of differentiation in terms of the actual product. Now, for this, we needed leaders who bring in customer segmentation, differentiation as core capabilities that we need to develop. And while still having that sharpness that commodity traders normally have. And so we needed to look for people to lead trading teams who are not necessarily the best traders themselves, but who could energize these trading teams to find out what is really that niche gap for the customer, which we need to figure out and spend a lot of time to find out because the customer is not going to tell you, here is what I want you to do different. So that required people with more empathy, people with more of a marketing kind of a mindset than the historical model of a successful trading leader, which is somebody who's very sharp, good with numbers, and who's good with risk management strategies. And of course, you needed these people to also know how to complement themselves with people in their teams who may have these capabilities that they do not have. So sometimes it's not only alignment, it's also about transformation.
Very interesting. I want to expand on the topic of talent development. Something that continuously fascinates me is how closely linked the topics of talent development and performance are, but they are also actually separate. So, what's your approach to this? Have you seen any initiatives that you have rolled out or you experienced to effectively manage both?
Great question again, because let's put it this way, you need to give me feedback to do better in my job. You need to look a little different, you need to have a little different energy in the room. And let's say you also need to have a conversation with me to help me understand that I can do more, I have the potential to do more, and draw it out from me in terms of Actually, what is my aspiration? Is it aligned? What are my fears? And it requires a very different kind of energy to be there in both these conversations. My biggest learning is if you try to do both in one go, it doesn't succeed, number one. So we can look at it in two different ways. There are some organizations where I worked where the first one is in the context of the regular performance review or regular check-in conversations as to how are you doing. Then give feedback on what can be done in a better way. In that organization, it was mature enough to say the development conversation needs to be actually held at a different point of time, not be part of the performance review conversation. Makes life easy. And some other organizations where I worked, both were meant to happen as part of the same cycle. And my coaching to my line managers is it's okay for you to have two different conversations, pick two different days, and so that you're able to do justice to a performance review and a performance coaching the way you need to do it versus a development conversation, which is more about possibilities and about what's in store in the future.
Is there any HR processes you think that can be implemented better to really help separate the two? And a lot of managers, when they approach these conversations as well, I often find that they're not well equipped, to tell apart the two. So, what are your experience in this? How can HR better support, not just from a processes standpoint, but also from a manager capability upskilling
Sure.
standpoint?
A lot of times it is about the manager's will followed by the skill in order to be able to do this. And not every people manager necessarily has this will at the level where it needs to be. I mean, we can keep looking for them, but I think that's an ideal world. So, how me and my team, how we have handled this is we roped in people managers who are particularly good at having these kinds of conversations as mentors or as buddies to people managers to help them prepare themselves better to have these conversations with their own team members. I think that's one thing at a human level. Second, at a process level, make sure that these two conversations happen at a very different time frame.
Where does compensation come in? I mean, we all ex HR, right? We know they're all separate. Well, I would maybe argue compensation is more closely tied to performance, but from your experience, how does that then come in this whole space of talent management?
I think we could spend hours on this subject. As somebody said once, compensation decision is one of those most private kind of decisions in an organization with maximum public impact. Because guess what? Every organization seems to have a very good grapevine. Things get to be known. So then what will help an organization? Honestly, it's about fairness and clarity about what am I compensating people. Because you look at base salary, you look at benefits, you look at annual variable pay, and then you look at long term incentive. All four serve very different purposes. Base salary is making sure that you offer a market competitive compensation. Short term variable pay is to make sure that you are rewarding and recognizing results, not the how, but the what. Benefits is more about call it company culture and contributing to an employee to be able to hold for his and her family's needs, be it medical or pension or those kinds of things. Long term incentive, depending on whether it's a privately held or a publicly held company, it has again a very different purpose. So I think number one, it's about having clarity and that people managers understand this very well so that they don't look at HR when there is a question, but they feel comfortable enough to give those answers. At a completely different level, I think this is one area where I feel we as HR professionals we can do better as a function across industries, which is invest in articulating expertise career paths as different from people manager or asset manager or P&L manager career paths. Because when you don't do that, line managers like to promote people so that they can have better salary because it is linked to your salary grade. Typically, that is dependent on how many people you lead or how much dollars you're bringing in. But that cannot be the only way to differentiate. I mean, if you really value expertise, you also need to develop those career paths, wherein some of the best practices are actually in the world of pharma, where peer group would elect you as a fellow or a senior fellow, and there is a recognition and a reward associated with that. And there is also a lot of prestige associated with it, and there is a lot of credibility associated because the people who are putting you at that level are people who understand science themselves, right? Now, some organizations where I worked had these dual career paths, which made it a little more easy for a good salesperson or a good technical person or a good subject matter expert to continue to experience good things in life without becoming necessarily a manager.
The skill sets that you need to become a people manager is just so different from the technical skill sets to make you an expert in that specialized field as well. And staying on the topic of leadership, something that I'm curious about and something that I've read in interviews you've given in the past is how much you advocate for the growth mindset amongst the leaders. What have you experienced before or programs you may have rolled out before that encourages this at all layers, but particularly at the leadership level?
Couple of things come to my mind, and I'm going to again share an example to bring it out live. So in Syngenta, 2000 calendar year was one where we focused a lot on exactly this topic because we realized we had very clear vision about why are we here and the purpose, which is to enable farmers to succeed. The mission was also reasonably clear thanks to that listening exercise which said digital mindset and digital skill sets are very, very important. Now, things are still not happening exactly the way they need to happen. And that is when one of the leadership team members made a comment. It's not so much about the regional leaders doing something, but the country leadership teams actually taking that ownership and accountability to figure out how to grow the business in the geographies. So it was also an opportunity for me to make myself a bit vulnerable because I felt if this is a topic that is really important for us, let me not outsource the facilitation to someone else, but do it myself with a couple of other colleagues from HR. So it meant literally standing in front of country leadership teams one by one, 2 day workshops, where you start with, first of all, making them feel comfortable that, hey, I'm not here to give you some magic pill to figure out your growth agenda, but I'm here to help you actually discuss and agree on what would growth mindset look like in action, what would it look like in terms of leadership behaviors and the shifts that you need to make, the from to. And by the way, there is also what is called as limits to growth, because if we just grow the top line without thinking about the denominator, that's not going to be a healthy one. So how do you also manage constraints while you have all these dreams about growing into bigger? It's also about bringing in efficiencies. So the first time you bring that conversation into the room, they look at you like, he's giving me a corporate pill here, which is no increase in budgets. But then when we do some exercises like polarities, you have to breathe in, but you also have to breathe out. You have to think of the short term, you have to also think of the long term, right? So it's not just grow. For you to grow in this, you also have to give up something else and maybe do something less of. What is that less of something, more of something? I was not there to tell them, but facilitate conversations. So pretty interesting. I survived to tell the tale. We did that in 8 countries. And the most interesting pattern that emerged is a lot of the leaders telling us this is 8 countries, so on an average, 9 people in a leadership team. So 70 plus people saying, we are so much on the dance floor, to use an analogy, busy dancing, we don't go to the balcony to take that view and look at what the forest is like and who's doing what. And we're all behaving like we're all bricklayers, right? But yeah, we can go and lay the bricks once in a while, but we have to build a cathedral. And it's our job to tell the bricklayer what that cathedral needs to look like. So the balcony versus the dance floor shift was the one that actually came out in Japan, that came out in Pakistan, 2 ends of the region. One would say very different cultures, but interestingly, in both the countries, this was what they said. And mind you, I didn't tell them. At the end of their discussion, they said, this is something we need to do more of, which is go into the balcony. And then some interesting conversations on if I go to the balcony, then who will do the dancing? How do I make sure that I still have control because I still need to deliver my monthly targets? So, growth mindset to me is a lot about exploring, making yourself vulnerable during the process. But then you do have clarity at the end of such exercises as to what should I do more of, what should I do less of, what are the trade offs.
There's so much that you said that I love. I mean, even the dance floor and balcony is a
Mhm.
form of polarity in itself, right? being able to switch from daily operations to taking a step back and seeing the strategic, the bird's eye view as to are we still in the right direction than just the daily motions. What I also love is the fact that you didn't outsource it. You yourself and your HR team trained on this. And to your point earlier, that actually sometimes the best way for our leaders to also grow is they themselves teach it back. And I think the very fact that because you as HR did the training, someone within the company with the same context, I'm also an employee of the company, it makes the training a lot more relatable and personable. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you about what the future looks like. So, if you were to fast forward yourself to many years later, what do you think the ideal workplace of the future would look like?
I don't have a crystal ball.
That's often the answer too, by the way.
Let me do this. I'll do a bit of reflection. How some of the future of work initiatives panned out in my earlier organizations. And then what are some learnings which possibly we can implement? First thing is, we all started this future of work from the position of let's simply move away from the way we are working, which is the work is something that is meant to be done in the workplace. Two, any and every work can be done from out of the workplace because guess what? We did that during the COVID period. But COVID is gone. The world has come back to a normal. And we can't pretend like COVID is still there and therefore everything needs to be done remotely. It can't be 0 or 100, number one. I think that's a big learning for me. And why do I say this? Because there are certain functions, especially where you learn over a period of time like an apprentice. Now, if you're simply going to work from home all the time, who is it that you're going to connect with socially and get the benefit of their tacit wisdom? I mean, you're not going to be able to get that. The biggest surprise for me was my 22-year-old daughter then. She did an internship which was 100% work from home. And I thought, she'll be very thrilled about it. But she said, no, actually, Papa, I don't really get to know how things are done and how somebody has picked up this way of doing things because I don't get to interact with anyone other than on a Zoom call where it is only about work. And this is a 22-year-old. So, number one, I want to bust this myth. This generation Z wants only work from home and that generation will only work from office. No, I think this is not so much about generations, but it's about at an individual level, some people have some preferences. Second, we need to be cognizant of what else needs to be learned by a person, what else needs to be accomplished by a person other than just a work deliverable as we formulate these policies of work from home or work from office, or what I would advocate a healthy hybrid. That's one. The other learning I have, Dorothy, on this direction, I want to connect it back to our discussion on development and high potentials and talent. 20, 25 years ago, most people from India of my generation, if you said go to Timbuktu, the answer will be when? When can I go? Because that was also a time when you didn't really have too many dual career couples. And I guess it's not only India, it's world over now, right? So, gone are those days when you'll have a trailing spouse. And today, in a family, both partners wanting to be economically productive and both wanting to have their careers to blossom. And then you cannot, therefore, say you have to move from one country to another country necessarily as a part of your career growth. Yeah, it would be good. I've myself lived in 4 different countries. I've valued a lot. My family benefited, but we can't say it is either that way or no way, right? Companies need to understand there are many jobs. Thanks to COVID, we figured out they can be done remotely, which means there are many global roles which don't need to exist in so called head office or regional office or even in a country office. Singapore is a nation state, but let's say Indonesia, not everybody needs to be in the Jakarta head office. You can be in different parts of the country. Distributed leadership, that's what it boils down to. I think it's a reality. We have experienced it. It will be tempting to see how much further we can build on it. Last but not the least, I also like to believe there is so much of automation. There is so much of artificial intelligence which is happening, will happen. It will change the way we look at what is actually work because there's so much of what is being done by humans today which will be done by machines. Now, to me, it represents opportunities for humans to then figure out how do I add value? And I'm a believer in this. Every single technology shift that has happened in the past 20, 25 years, which are all supposed to be job killers. Actually, very few of them really killed jobs at an absolute number, but they changed the skills that we need to have. So I see this as a triangle. One, figuring out, you know, what kind of a workplace do we need to have? And hybrid workplace is my guess is what will work in most companies. The way you treat somebody doing lab work will be different from the way you need to treat somebody doing factory work, will be different from doing field work, from office work. So that's one point in the triangle. The other point in the triangle is distributed leadership roles, which would allow more families to experience growth together without having to be separated because they have to go in different directions. And third, understand automation in terms of how is it changing the human being's role in work being done in the value chains.
Amazing. And if you were to give HR an advice, HR obviously strategic value, what advice would you give them in building towards this workplace of the future?
Never bring a best practice because that best practice works somewhere else. It may or may not work here. And it's very important for you to co create whatever new change you want to bring in with people who are going to experience it. You can also say this is design thinking, right? This is exactly what design thinking tells us. Help the users understand what is the change that is going to come in so that they feel involved and then they're vested in this change also succeeding subsequently. So the users for a lot of these kind of policies are line managers, people managers. Very important for us to engage them. If I have to give only one advice, that would be my advice.
I love what you talked about HR not just following best practice blindly, but to really understand what the business needs are. So, what's your advice for organization to not simply react to trends, but to really figure out what is that North Star that they're going after?
I guess there is no one right answer, but I'll try to look at two different facets. One is there is one kind of change which broadly people understand why the change is required. I would say then the North Star for HR is in figuring out how to implement this as fast as we can, as many people on board, if not everybody on board, and make sure that there is a feedback loop so that you try to bring the change very fast through some pilots and not wait for everything to be, boiled over a long period of time. I think that's one way to look at it. Sometimes there is also change which either you're looking around the corner and you're seeing the need, but maybe others are not. And you need to figure out how do I help others also to see what I'm seeing so that it is a co created kind of a change. An example comes to my mind. I was in an organization which was doing extremely well financially. The industry was also doing very well. And it's one of those things I can't give you very explicit details, but what I saw coming was some changes from the regulatory point of view, which could really increase our COGS, cost of goods sold, if we don't have more efficiencies on the operations side. This was in a geography where historically labor cost was seen as relatively cheap. But that country was going from a minimum wage to a living wage kind of a model. And so I saw that coming. And then when I wanted that change to be prioritized, my management team said, but this is a relatively small part of the COGS. Why are you so bothered about it? It was not easy, but hung on to it. And they understood why this is probably important. And a year down the line, when that living wage became a reality, we were a much more efficient organization. And that helped. So, one, if it is very well understood as to the why is very well understood, then our role is about agility and bringing everybody on board as fast as possible and a feedback loop. If it is not so, co creating by involving others, hanging on to your point with some conviction while others are in the process of getting onboarded, I think that's what it will take. We need to be trusted at the end of the day that we are not here to implement some best practices, but we are here to bring some change because we believe that is directly connected with the purpose and the success of the organization.
Listening to your answers, I'm smiling because it reminds me about, again, the clarities that you talk about at the start
Mhm.
of this podcast. And it's essentially bringing clarity around the big picture and also bringing clarity to all employees on how they can contribute to the big picture. Okay, JP. So now I'm gonna, switch gear to a bit, hopefully more fun section of this podcast. I'm gonna ask you some rapid fire questions, and I'm gonna start with, what is one thing you wish more employees understood about HR?
Yeah, so the analogy that comes to my mind is a physician or a nurse. We go to them asking them to treat us, and we expect them to be always very confident, always very focused on us. It's almost like we don't expect them to be like normal human beings. HR is the same. We bring a lot of change, and sometimes we look like we are here to have fun by bringing change, but we are human too. We have emotions. We can be glad. We can be mad about something. We can be sad. We can be scared. Sometimes all four at the same time. I think, yeah, it will be great when people see us as human, like anybody else and everybody else in the company.
Reciprocating the empathy, very important. What's one book you will recommend every HR professional to read?
Well, I read this book once in a while myself, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
I've read
Dale
that book.
Carnegie, it's an amazing book because he tells you in very simple terms success is not what you want to do, but you helping somebody else to do what they want to do. And that's the job of HR. We are not running the business, we are here to serve people running the business. And if we know how to make them successful, which is what you learn from this book, our job will be easy.
I love that. And what's one personal productivity hack that you will recommend others to try?
It is not something I do it myself very religiously, but I do it once in a while. Make a quadrant perhaps on a quiet Sunday evening and see if you can do it every week. And the x axis can be important, y axis can be urgent. And see where is my time, where is my energy going? Is it in that most urgent, most important quadrant, or at least the most urgent or the important quadrant? And what can I do to reduce my time and focus from the other quadrant? How can I help those issues still be managed because somebody will still have to pay attention to it? Whenever I do this once in a while, it's very interesting to see where my time has gone, which I did not intend it to go, but it just happened. And it serves me as a good reminder of what I should do the next week.
It reminds me of if it's in the least important, least urgent, you should actually even ignore it or delegate it
Yeah,
away.
absolutely.
Next question is a bit more personal. What's one advice you will give your younger self?
I learned at the age of 37 the power of giving when we were living in Minneapolis. And this was also 2008. I'll never forget this, something said by my secretary at that time, Pam Van Hove, very fond of Pam. So we had the United Way campaign and we raised a record amount of money that year. And I thought actually that's the year where we will raise lesser money because everybody is in trouble. People losing jobs and families. The 2008 crisis came down very hard on especially Americans. So I was very surprised and I told Pam, this is amazing. How did we do this? I didn't really have much to do, but others did. She said, Jairam, everybody knows this is the time when every dollar has that much more impact for the recipient. I'll never forget that learning of the power of giving, how when thousand people give thousand small things, it will become a very, very big thing for the recipient. I wish I started giving more of my time and money and whatever else I could give when I was much younger.
To this point, thank you so much for giving time to this podcast. But I will end with this final question. What is one advice you will give to a young person who's just starting out in HR?
Ah, okay. I would say look at yourself like any other business employee. Understand the customer, understand the financials, understand operations, and understand technology. Never ever think that you're HR, so you don't need to know these four things as well as people in a marketing role or technology role or some other role. Second, seek out opportunities in other functions. My own belief is if I had exposure to more functions early on in my career, perhaps I could have been a better HR leader. Right? And I think all of you deserve to be fantastic HR leaders with lot more knowledge of the business as you grow in your careers.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you very much, JP.
Thank you very much for having me here, Dorothy. Talking is easy, asking great questions is difficult. You've done a fabulous job. Thank you for having me here.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you found the conversation valuable, do like and subscribe to our podcasts on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast app. You can also learn more about the show and subscribe to our community at engagerocket.co/HR impact. I'll see you in the next episode.